As much as we would like to be able to make our students do things, we simply cannot. I mean, y'all know life would be a lot easier if we could force other people to act and behave how we want them to act and behave. But unfortunately, they are individual human beings. They are their own people, and thus they have their own free will. So we cannot control our students, just like you cannot control your students. The only thing we can control in our teaching environment is ourselves and how we handle things and how we react to things. So what do we do then if we cannot control these people? What do we do when our students simply won't do the work? How are we supposed to manage that if they are just absolutely refusing to do what we're asking them to do? I have 3 things that I think will help to kind of control this as best as we can, because all it involves is us controlling ourselves since we can't control them. So let's get into it.
This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode.
This episode, as all of them this year will really be, was inspired from a submission to my podcast survey. Y'all know I do that every year. And a teacher said, I need help building rigor in my students and getting them to complete homework. I lose a lot of time because my students won't do their study guides for homework. Then we have lower test scores. Then we have to spend more time reviewing, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a very specific submission, but there were a lot around this topic of like, my students just won't do work. I can't get them to like complete practice or whatever. What do I do? And like I said at the top, there's only so much you can do because you cannot physically force them. And some of this is going to come back to culture, not just the culture in your classroom, but also the culture of your school. And if your students respect you, but if also they respect your admin. And if your admin are going to back you up and follow through. So that is a huge component of this. And here's what I will say. I hate to say it, but your admin can make or break your teaching experience. I cannot tell you how many people have communicated with me that they've been in this bad situation. They thought they hated teaching. They thought they hated their job. They just switched schools and had a totally different admin, and now everything's changed. So highly recommend, if your admin is just terrible, especially if they're micromanaging you, listen to episode 156 of the podcast about that. If they're just straight up absent this spring before contracts come out, it might be a good time to start looking into different places you can teach, because the problem may not be you, it may be them. Okay, but let's get back to the point of this episode, which is, what do we do when students just won't work? Okay, there's 3 things: communication, consistent reinforcement, and consequences. So first, clear communication of your expectations. Yes, you cannot make them work, but you can and do set the tone for the entire culture of your classroom and how it's going to be run. Now, the hard thing is if you've kind of let the ball drop, let things slip, gotten a little lazy, and this is not to judge you. We all do it. I do it in my home all the time. I constantly have to hit the reset button in my school. But just know, if you've allowed the tone to be changed, then it's your job to reset it. And you're going to have to do that. A lot easier to be done at the beginning of the year. Totally can still be done though. So I don't know if I've shared this on the podcast yet, but in my home, actually, we've had to hit the reset button recently in a hard way about screen time. And this kind of was the result of 3 different things. One was December just getting out of control with our coziness and watching a lot of Christmas movies together. 2 was 2 of my 3 children now are in grade school, and they use a lot of tech at their school. And so I feel like they're getting a ton of screen time there. And then 3 was that as I now have older kids, 2 of my 3 kids now have, rec sports or piano lessons or a lot of like activities in the evening. So we don't have time to be watching TV, because then they don't have playtime. Then their playtime gets sucked up with TV time, and then they're going to a sport, and then we're coming home, we're doing homework, we're going to bed. So all of this has led to us being like, in 2026, I just put my foot down and was like, hey, we now watch 1 show a day. That's it. and you get no control over the TV on the weekends, because typically on the weekends we're watching sports or we're just doing stuff as a family. So no weekend TV other than sports like that we would be watching as a family, or maybe a show we'd watch all together like America's Funniest Home Videos. And then during the week, we have assigned days. Okay, it's your day to pick the one show that's 22 minutes long, and then the TV's off. And there was some revolting, I will say that, particularly from my almost 4-year-old, lost his ever-living mind. But honestly, it was like maybe 2 days of that, and then they have all just fallen in line. And now the expectation has been clearly communicated, and that has changed everything in my home. They get home, they check the calendar on the fridge that has all sorts of things on it, but it also has whose turn it is to pick the show today. And then they're like, okay, it's sister's show. She picks. The boys, if they don't like what she picked, okay, go outside, go play. No one is holding your feet down and making you watch, this girly show she picked out. She's a trooper and sits through y'all's shows all the time. And I just have found that clear communication of expectations has been an absolute game changer. And it's the same in your classroom. If students are not working, and it's, this is coming out in February, at this point in the year, you've allowed this to happen. So we have got to clearly communicate new expectations to our students about what behavior we are expecting them to have. And we are expecting them to do stuff in this classroom. This is one reason why I'm a big fan of not assigning homework, because then it's very easy for me to barter with students and say, I'm going to respect your time outside of this classroom by not assigning you homework, but you respect my 47 minutes or my 85 minutes that I get you. And if you do not, then you are going to have to do stuff outside of class. So get really clear on your communication of your expectations. This is going to be like a State of the Union address where you're going to sit them down and you're going to have to do this. And there will be revolting, just like my 4-year-old did. But they will fall in line if you do number 2. So number 1, clear communication of expectations. Number 2, consistent reinforcement. Just like you set the tone of your classroom, you also maintain the tone of your classroom and maintain the culture. No, you cannot force them to fall in line, but you can consistently reinforce the expectations and the consequences, which we'll get to in a second. So this is up to you for the maintaining. If you start to be like, oh, whatever, we'll just throw in an extra TV show, then they start asking for the extra TV show. That's the thing. I'm not trying to be super black and white and be like, don't give them any grace. But at the same time, the more you make those boundaries dotted lines rather than hard lines, I'm thinking about a road here. When you have that dotted line in the road and you can cross it versus a double yellow, which cannot be crossed, the more dotted lines there are, the more they'll keep asking, the more they'll keep wearing you down. And it calls for like another hard reset, okay? The more you consistently reinforce your expectations and the consequences for that, the less you're going to have to put a lot of energy into doing that, because they're not going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. They will absolutely do that at first, but they will stop eventually if you hold the line. Now, thinking back to the original submission I mentioned at the top of this episode about the teacher saying that they were trying to build rigor, get them to complete their homework, but then they're not doing their study guides, their test scores are lower. Now she's having to do more time reviewing. Okay, like I said, first of all, scrap the homework. All things done in class, all work done in class, because you have zero control over these people, but you have really zero control over them when they're not in your classroom. At least when they're in your classroom, you can annoy them enough to put them into motion, okay? Constant vigilance, a la Mad Eye Moody. I'm getting my steps in, I'm doing laps, my ears are open. I'm not lesson planning. I'm not really grading anything intense. I'll grade my prime times, but I'm not doing much of that in my class period. I am walking around, I'm listening. If you are not working, I'm just standing next to you until you start working. My physical presence is going to annoy you. And I use a lot of humor in my classroom. That works for me and my personality. We laugh, but I will stalk you until you do work. Constant vigilance, consistent reinforcement. Again, I'm going to be a psycho in my classroom about you working while you're here, and I'm going to stand next to you. I will hold your pencil if I have to and make you hold it. I have wrapped some desk legs with a meter stick to scare people awake, okay? I like a flair for the dramatics, I'm going to be honest. Again, that goes with my personality. It may not go for yours. You know your environment, you know yourself. But I will say, I can't control you, but I can control what you do in my classroom a little bit. And if you respect my time, I will respect yours. no homework. Just absolutely scrap that. Now, you're like, you still haven't answered the original person's question. I'm coming back to it, okay? I just had to address that thing about homework. Constant vigilance. That's how you consistently reinforce. Okay, so number 1, clear communication of expectations. Number 2, consistent reinforcement. Number 3, consequences for their choices. You have to hold the line and follow through on a consequence. Okay, so what are the consequences? Natural consequences for anyone work best, which means whatever makes the most sense. It works best in my own household for my children. It works best with your high school students in your classroom. So for example, going back to the original prompt, okay, they're not doing their study guides, which you've assigned for homework. I do try to build in class time to do study guides. And then if they don't, they do have to finish those at home. But typically if students are doing what I'm asking them to do and working productively, they'll always have time to do their study guides in my class period. Now, yes, sometimes it does end up being at-home work because they don't use their time wisely in my class. Now, I've infiltrated their time. They have to do homework. Okay, what is the natural consequence if they don't do their study guides? Well, 1, I do grade those. So if they're not doing them, it's a small grade, but they're going to get a 0. 2, the next natural consequence is that they will have lower test scores. The result of that is not you spending more days reviewing. You have hopefully done everything you can to prepare them. If they have chosen not to do the study guide, which you have assigned to them to help prepare them for the test, that is a natural consequence then if they do poorly on the test. So let that be the consequence. Hold the line and follow through. Okay, I'm not going to let you do a retest. I'm not going to spend more days reviewing. If I have to do a retest because my district requires me to, it's going to be a different test. And you will not be allowed to take the retest until you've completed the study guides you never did the first time and you come in for tutoring and get help. So we are going to have consequences, and they need to be consequences that make sense. Okay, now, of course, they're not going to do your study guides also if they don't see that doing the study guide actually helps them on the test. So one thing I'm very intentional about as I create It's Not Rocket Science units are my packets and the cover pages. The cover page of every single one of my, I think it's like 40 units that I have, has the unit divided into concepts, the concepts broken down into objectives and vocabulary, and sometimes practice problems, which are like quantitative, just to give them an example of a math problem they might see on the test. And that is what they do for the study guide. Now, when they take my test, every single test question, you could draw a line to which objective, which vocabulary term, and or which practice question it goes to. And at the beginning of the year, I do this. After the test, we sit down, I say, pull out your study guide, pull out the cover page of the packet. I show them. We make it a scavenger hunt. Okay, look at question number 7. Where did this come up on the study guide? So that they see that this study guide is not busy work. It is an intentional tool. And again, if they want to use AI to make the study guide, okay. But then you still need to study it, because if you don't, you're never going to do well on the test because all the questions come back to this. Another thing you can do to reward students who are making the study guides is maybe you just say, hey, it's test day. All right, if you made a study guide, pull it out. You can use it on this test and see how well they do. But there need to be consequences for their choices. We are not going to, if they choose not to work, again, I can't control them. I can only control me. I'm not then going to just immediately drop a week of lessons plan so I can reteach them stuff that they didn't do the first time because they were not active and accountable for their own learning, which, speaking of, episode 155 is all about how to create active and accountable learners in your classroom, how you make your students accountable for their own learning. And it also, in that episode, I specifically touch on if you get backlash or pushback from parents and admin. So be sure to listen to that. But y'all need to make a consequence and hold the line. Now, if you're like, I'm struggling to come up with a natural consequence for them not doing XYZ, I recommend talking to your department at your next department meeting, talking to your department chair, talking to other teachers who you respect in your school, even if they're not science teachers, or that you see students really respect, and seeing what they're doing, what their consequences are, how they've created their culture, and absolutely talk to your admin. Like if a student is not participating to the point that they are disrupting other students from their learning, that is then where we need admin help. We need extra help. That is where, if you have in-school suspension, that is a great place to be. One of the schools I taught in was a rough student population, And the admin, though, was amazing in that they were like, we just have a no tolerance policy for you not doing anything in your classes. And so you could at any point call the front desk and say, I need a vice principal to come remove this student from my classroom. And it was no questions asked. They would come take that student and they went to ISS and they were just stuck there. Okay. And students hated ISS because it was like the scariest teacher ever who ran it. And they had to do all their work independently. And usually it only took 1 or 2 times from an admin having to do this. And, admin knew the frequent flyers for ISS, but then the students wanted to be in my classroom because I made it a place where they wanted to be. But at the end of the day, there has to be a consequence. You cannot just sit here and be a blob. That is not an option. Okay. They lose privileges. They can't have any tech. We'll remove any activities that involve tech. So we become a tech-free classroom. You do have to be kind of intense about this, y'all. Like, this is not, your students are not going to change their behaviors just through passive transport, like just through diffusion. You are going to have to actively transport. You're going to have to actively put energy in, utilize some ATP, my biology teachers know, to make them change. Okay. And that comes from clear communication of expectations, consistent reinforcement of your expectations, and 3, those consequences for their choices. Now, the last thing I'll say about this is so important, the clear communication, because it allows you to be proactive rather than reactive. This is something I talk about anytime I talk about classroom management in any context, because if you are like me, you can probably guess, I run a little hot. I do. I just do. And it is so easy for me to be reactive. It is so easy for me to respond with a harsh word really quick. And then I tend to regret that later. But I am able to stay calm. I am able to keep my nervous system settled and not in fight or flight mode, which I think I've told y'all before. My husband says I have no flight. I have only fight. So to keep my nervous system out of fight mode, if I have made my expectations clear, I've made the consequences clear, this has all been clearly communicated, and I'm consistently reinforcing them, then I can say, hey, just a reminder, this is the expectation. This is the consequence if you just are not going to work and do what I've asked you to do. I'm going to reinforce that. This is your last chance for a redo or to make a different choice. Okay, now you've made your choice. You're going to ISS. Or now you've made your choice. You're getting a 0. Or now you made your choice. I'm sending you to the hall. Whatever it is, I'm contacting your parent. You decide on those consequences that's going to work for your specific student environment. For those serious problem students, you need admin involvement, period. Especially if they're only doing this in your class, that's telling. Let's find out why. Let's talk to other teachers. If they're doing this in every class, then this is a group project, y'all. Get the admin involved. And again, if you're like, oh, my admin would never help me in that way. Okay, that's actually their job. Their job is to support teachers being able to teach. And yes, they have to data track and do all these other things. I'm not downplaying what admin do, but potentially start looking at other opportunities. I'm not trying to be glib about this. I know there's so much that goes into you deciding where you teach and all of that, but I will say, like, good teachers are a valuable, non-renewable resource, especially a science teacher that is trained and has a teaching certificate and has teaching experience. Like, you are a unicorn compared to some others, so you are valuable. And oftentimes it's easier to find other teaching opportunities than maybe you think. So all of that to say, your take-home challenge, get clear on your expectations, get help with consequences if you need to, and start tomorrow, have your State of the Union tomorrow, communicating these expectations to your students clearly and then consistently reinforcing them with them. There is no reason why students should just be in your classroom not doing anything. We're not going to allow that to happen, okay? And if we're struggling with it, we are going to bring in outside help with our admin to change the narrative here. We're going to address the class culture. You can do it. If you want to look into any of those other episodes I mentioned, they're linked in my show notes as always, which can be found at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 223. And leave a review for the podcast today if you feel motivated to have a little come to Jesus, a little State of the Union address with maybe your students or maybe in your home after I shared about the one we've had recently in my home. And if you want to DM me on Instagram at its.not.rocket.science, you just look up It's Not Rocket Science, you'll see my name, Rebecca Joyner. That's me. I'd love to discourse with you on this. If you need some further encouragement or support, reach out to me.
All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.